My name is Eleanor Whitaker. I am 72 years old. And 3 years ago, my own son changed the locks on the company I built. Not metaphorically. Literally. The security badge that had opened those glass doors for 28 years blinked red. Access denied. I stood there for a full 10 seconds, staring at the small flashing light as if it had made a mistake. I founded Whitaker Industrial Supply with my late husband in 1994. It started in our garage, 1 desk, 1 phone line, 2 folding chairs. We supplied specialty parts to regional manufacturers. Nothing glamorous. Nothing viral. Just steady contracts and honest margins. When my husband died suddenly in 2006, I did not sell. Everyone expected me to. You've done enough, people said. Let your son take over. My son Gregory was 26 at the time. Ambitious. Intelligent. Restless. I gave him a position. I did not give him control. There is a difference. For years, we worked side by side. I handled contracts, vendor relationships, financial oversight. Gregory handled expansion initiatives, digital systems, marketing modernization. He was good, but he was impatient. And impatience in business is expensive. The first crack appeared when he began referring to the company as his in meetings. At my company, he would say to clients. I corrected him once gently. Our company. He smiled, but I saw something shift behind his eyes. Ownership is intoxicating. Especially when you didn't build the foundation. When I turned 70, the board began asking subtle questions. Have you considered succession planning? I had. But succession is not surrender. I own 51% of the company shares. Gregory owned 29%. The remaining shares were divided among 2 long-term board members and 1 outside investor who had joined a decade earlier. Control was clear. Or so I believed. 2 years later, Gregory began pushing aggressive expansion into international markets. Higher risk. Higher leverage. Debt exposure. We're stagnating, he argued. We're stable, I replied. Stability is slow death. That sentence should have warned me. He wasn't talking about revenue. He was talking about me. The board meetings became tense. Gregory presented polished projections, slide decks, growth curves, confident language about scalability. I asked inconvenient questions. What happens if currency fluctuations hit 8%? What happens if supplier costs spike mid-contract? What happens if your forecast misses by 12%? He would sigh softly. We can't operate from fear. It's not fear, I said. It's memory. I had lived through 2 recessions and a supply chain collapse. He had read about them. 6 months later, something happened that I did not see coming. The outside investor, Martin Keller, requested a private meeting. You and Gregory need alignment, he said carefully. We have alignment, I replied. We disagree on pace. He hesitated. He feels limited. Limited by what? By your reluctance to scale. There it was. Reluctance. Age-coded language. 3 weeks later, the board called an emergency session. Agenda. Leadership restructuring. Gregory presented a proposal. Transition to CEO emeritus structure, he said smoothly, looking at me with something that resembled sympathy. Mom would retain advisory presence while operational leadership transitions. Transition. It sounds gentle. It isn't. I am the CEO, I said calmly. For now, he replied. The vote did not pass. Not then. But the campaign had started. Over the next year, small shifts accumulated. Department heads were encouraged to report directly to Gregory for efficiency. Major vendor negotiations were scheduled without my knowledge. I was not excluded publicly. I was bypassed quietly. The day my badge stopped working was not spontaneous. It was coordinated. I called Gregory from the lobby. Why is my access denied? Silence on the other end. We had to make a temporary change. What change? The board voted this morning. My pulse slowed instead of racing. Voted on what? Operational transition. Without informing the majority shareholder? A pause. Then the sentence that ended something fundamental between us. You're not the future of this company. The board had aligned with him. How? Later, I discovered the truth. Martin Keller had acquired additional shares quietly over 18 months. Gregory had transferred part of his own stake strategically. Together, they had formed a controlling coalition. They had not outvoted me. They had outmaneuvered me. I drove home that day in silence. Not because I was defeated. Because I was calculating. You see, what Gregory forgot, what many ambitious successors forget, is that majority ownership is not the only form of power. Relationships are. Vendor loyalty is. Historical memory is. And credibility built over decades does not evaporate because someone installs new security software. The next morning, I called the two longest-standing board members, both in their 70s. I believe we need a conversation, I said. They agreed. Privately. And that was the beginning of the counterweight. The two longest-standing board members were Thomas Avery and Judith Caldwell. Thomas had joined us in 1998, when we were still negotiating contracts from a rented office with peeling paint. Judith came 3 years later, after retiring from a major logistics firm. They had watched Gregory grow from a teenager who sorted inventory boxes to an executive who wore tailored suits and spoke about leverage ratios. They also knew something Gregory did not fully understand. This company had not survived 3 recessions because of aggression. It survived because of discipline. We met privately at Thomas's home 2 days after my badge was disabled. No assistance. No minutes. No formalities. Did you know about the vote? I asked directly. Thomas looked uncomfortable. Judith did not. We knew it was coming, Judith said. And you supported it. Thomas cleared his throat. We supported transition. To what? I asked. Risk exposure? Judith leaned forward. Gregory convinced Martin that scaling quickly was necessary to increase valuation. For what purpose? I asked quietly. They exchanged a look. There it was. Exit strategy. Gregory had not just wanted leadership. He had wanted a future sale. And an accelerated valuation requires aggressive optics. Aggressive optics require short-term growth. Short-term growth requires risk. What you need to understand, Thomas said carefully, is that Martin now controls 18%. I'm aware, he replied. And Gregory transferred 6% to him under partnership incentives. That gave them 53% combined. Majority control. But majority control does not equal unanimous confidence. Do you believe this is wise? I asked. Neither answered immediately. That silence told me everything. Over the next 3 months, Gregory implemented his expansion plan with urgency that bordered on recklessness. International supplier contracts were signed with thinner margins, but higher volume targets. Short-term financing increased. Staffing expanded in anticipation of projected growth. Publicly, it looked impressive. Internally, I watched numbers. Because even without access to the building, I still received shareholder reports. That was the oversight Gregory had overlooked. The first red flag appeared in currency exposure. Fluctuations in overseas contracts shaved 4% off projected margins in the first quarter alone. The second red flag was shipping volatility. Delays compounded under volume pressure. The third was something more subtle. Vendor loyalty began shifting. I had spent decades building relationships on personal trust. Gregory had shifted to automated contract renegotiation software. Suppliers do not appreciate being treated like line items. I began making calls. Not to interfere. To listen. You didn't hear this from me, one supplier told me quietly. But the new structure feels transactional. Transactional is another word for fragile. By month 6, internal friction intensified. Department heads who once deferred to my oversight now faced aggressive quarterly targets. 2 senior managers resigned within 8 weeks. Gregory framed it as necessary restructuring. But turnover is expensive, especially when institutional knowledge walks out the door. Then the first public stumble happened. A large regional manufacturer, one of our most stable long-term clients, terminated their contract early. Reason cited: performance inconsistency. Translation: overextension. The board called an emergency session. I was not invited. That was their mistake. Because Thomas called me afterward. Revenue projections missed by 11%, he said quietly. And Martin is concerned. Concern from an investor is the first crack in coalition loyalty. Within weeks, lenders began asking questions about debt leverage ratios. Nothing catastrophic. But pressure accumulates. I remained silent publicly. Privately, I documented everything. Because I had learned something painful years earlier when my husband died unexpectedly. When you appear powerless, you must be precise. Gregory called me one evening. For the first time in months. I need to understand why suppliers are hesitating, he said. Perhaps you should ask them, I replied. They won't speak openly. They did with me. Silence. You've been calling them. I've been maintaining relationships. That undermines my authority. Authority is not given by a vote, I said calmly. It's earned through consistency. You're interfering. I am protecting my equity. The call ended coldly. But something had shifted. For the first time, he sounded uncertain. Then came the real fracture. An internal audit revealed discrepancies in projected international logistics costs. Nothing illegal. But overly optimistic assumptions had been presented to the board. Martin confronted Gregory. Not about ethics. About optics. Investors tolerate risk. They do not tolerate surprise. The next board meeting included my name on the agenda. I attended as majority shareholder. The room felt different. Less confident. More defensive. Gregory presented revised forecasts. Lowered projections. Extended break-even timelines. Temporary turbulence, he said. I waited until he finished. Then I spoke. For clarity, I began. Current leverage exceeds historical operational capacity by 23%. Vendor attrition has increased by 9%. Staff turnover has doubled. Currency exposure remains unhedged at scale. This is not turbulence. It is structural imbalance. Martin leaned back slowly. Gregory stared at me. You're fear-based, he said. No. Iraplia. I am data-based. Judith spoke next. We need stabilization. Stabilization. The word Gregory once equated with stagnation now hung heavily in the air. The vote that day did not remove him, but it established oversight. An operational review committee, chaired by me. He tried to mask the humiliation, but power had shifted. Not dramatically, incrementally. Over the next quarter, more weaknesses surfaced. Projected contracts failed to materialize. 2 international suppliers defaulted on delivery guarantees. A debt covenant warning arrived from a lender. Martin's tone changed completely. We may need corrective leadership, he said in a closed session. Corrective leadership. Corporate language for regret. Gregory confronted me afterward in the hallway. You planned this. I predicted this, I replied. You waited. Yes. His jaw tightened. You want me to fail. I want the company to survive. That is the difference between ego and stewardship. The decisive moment came 9 months after my badge first flashed red. Revenue underperformed for the 3rd consecutive quarter. Debt exposure triggered renegotiation. The board called a formal vote on executive restructuring. This time the numbers were different. Thomas and Judith had shifted. Martin abstained. Gregory lost CEO authority. Interim operational control returned to the Oversight Committee. To me, when the motion passed, no one celebrated. Corporate reversals are not dramatic. They are quiet and heavy. After the meeting, Gregory remained seated. Everyone else filtered out. You could have warned me, he said without looking up. I did. You never supported the vision. I supported sustainability. He finally looked at me. You never believed I could lead. I believed you needed patience. And now you need humility. That conversation was not triumphant. It was painful. Because no parent dreams of outmaneuvering their child. But leadership is not inherited. It is proven. Over the next 6 months, I implemented corrective measures, scaled back international exposure, renegotiated supplier terms personally, reduced non-essential expansion costs, reinstated 2 senior managers who had left. Slowly, margins stabilized. Confidence returned. Martin approached me privately one afternoon. You were right. I know. Gregory still wants equity control long-term. He may earn it. And if he doesn't, then he won't. Simple, clean, unemotional. 3 years ago, my own son locked me out of the company I built. Today, he sits across from me in strategic review meetings and presents revised proposals for approval. He works for the company, and the company answers to me. But the deeper truth is this. This was never about revenge. It was about preservation. Experience is not obsolete. Memory is not weakness. And patience is not fear. They thought age meant surrender. It meant endurance. And endurance, when paired with clarity, wins more often than ambition ever will.